So I decided, based also on the outputs that were now from the modeling groups, that maybe I will choose just a couple of slides which are the most interesting, which might be the most interesting. So I don't know how much you had understood. In Europe, we have a modeling suite which basically is composed of multiple sectoral models, which therefore allow for very detailed analysis of the different sectors, including process CO2 emissions, energy-related CO2, agriculture, LULUCF, and non-CO2. I come from the energy system modeling, so obviously this is where my focus is, and we work with a model called Primes. And what we were seeing when we go towards strong decarbonization and net zero or carbon neutral scenarios, however one wants to call them, is that there are a number of challenges in particular for the modeling, which are crucial. One is, for example, related to circular economy. And there are many elements which are also obviously dependent very much on literature, which is still under development, which is how much can you recycle? What does it mean if you have modular equipment, etc., which are obviously for something like an energy system model are more exogenous inputs. In terms of energy efficiency, which is obviously essential aside from everything else, there are all the challenges to examine the potential of increasing the efficiency of a transport system, including car sharing, improved scheduling, in industry heat recovery capabilities, as well as then particularly for Europe, maybe different worldwide. What might be important is obviously deeper innovation strategies in buildings. Now, in particular for buildings, and I think this is valid everywhere. In Europe, we obviously have an old building stock, so we have their issues. But in any case, what we have been developing within the model is to try to represent non-market barriers and idiosyncratic behaviors, because obviously not everybody behaves in the same way. So what we have been doing is doing an all more segmentation of buildings and dwelling types, including different household incomes, to represent also the difficulty of financing which different household incomes might have. Obviously, the challenges are always the long payback periods in industry, and what we have also tried to include is the nested choice of energy equipment choice. When you renovate, you will decide what type of renovation you do, and then what kind of equipment, if it's space heating or water heating, what kind of elements, and these should obviously be interlinked. The choices should not be independent. In industry, the big challenges that we see, I mean, which are, let's say, in reality as well as in the modeling, are obviously the decarbonization of process emissions. And then something which has been mentioned a number of times, which is obviously the use of hydrogen in the end uses. So in industry, as well as in buildings and transport, to represent that in the modeling. And I have another slide on hydrogen specifically, how we have been trying to implement that. The other issue is obviously that in reality for big industries, we only have very few investment cycles until 2050. So this, let's say, puts the policy urgency of being as quick as possible in deciding what our targets should be, because otherwise we risk having huge amounts of stranded assets. In transport, many challenges there as well: decarbonization of long distance mobility, inclusion of all sorts of novel technologies which might appear, so hydrogen, even electric aircrafts or trucks, even catenary trucks are in discussion here in Europe, and obviously all sorts of new energy carriers such as hydrogen and e-fuels, and then trends such as sharing, which might prove to be important in a context of decarbonization. This, I think, is less interesting in this context. This is now the idea also of sectoral integration. So how to then, if you have the electricity sector as a basis, which is decarbonized, how to include the power to the other sectors, if it's through heat, if it's through hydrogen and e-gas, or if it's through liquids, and what are the possible uses, which can either be direct uses, either used through transformation into heavier molecules, and then also obviously for the use of feedstock in chemicals, which obviously saves significantly in terms of process CO2 emissions. And obviously the possibility, once you do have liquids, to use them also in the sectors where substitution possibilities are very, very limited, to have this possibility in order to use them.
Alessia, 1 more minute, please.
Yes. So these are the kind of schemes that come out of it, and I think so, if these presentations are shared in the background material, one can have a look at all the processes that we have tried to include in the modeling, which obviously make it sometimes complex, not always transparent, but it does include then all the possibilities. Power, obviously the big problem of renewables and flexibility, which need to be included through inclusion of unit commitment with capacity expansion, which is typical for modeling, and obviously the production of these new fuels and the storage then of the flexible electricity produced. We have now also included a hydrogen module, exactly for the reasons which have been mentioned by several people today, to understand how these can be used, how hydrogen can be traded between countries, if it can be traded, where is the optimal location of the hydrogen production compared to the RES availability, for example. So these are the developments we have been recently working on, because obviously RES-E availability is different in countries. Yeah, this is the typical thing, that obviously when we move, for example, to higher targets in 2030, this allows for electricity to decarbonize earlier, and therefore all the other sectors to take advantage of the fact that the electricity is already decarbonized. And for this reason, in Europe, we're trying to anticipate the 2030 targets or have decided to move them to 55%. So I think the last part is the most relevant here. So the roadmap, as we see it from a modeling perspective and non. So obviously electricity as a zero carbon carrier in transport, electrification, but also the production of electricity as carbon free first. And then obviously the production of somehow carbon neutral fuels in order to allow for the actual net zero, because otherwise it will be extremely challenging, because there are processes with today's technologies as we know them, which will be basically impossible to decarbonize, according obviously of today's knowledge, excluding breakthrough technologies. So that is a very short summary of what I wanted to present.